What y'all listening to?
Limelight Highlight Podcast.
Welcome back to the show in your silver lining space to take a break from the stressful everyday. We were gone last week, but we're back with another glorious episode for your listening consideration. And as far as updates go, I was involved this weekend with another amazing event presented by Active Valor, the nonprofit organization that is dedicated to giving new purpose to veterans by pairing them as mentors to children of our nation's fallen service members, also referred to as Gold Star children or Gold Star families. I'm currently working on getting the founder of that organization to be a guest on the podcast for a later date, so tune in for that later. More updates to come. And as far as the block gives back, they'll be having their 4 blocks in 4 weeks. So if you happen to be in Philly in April or want to see them and try to get involved, check them out at theblockgivesback.org to see how you can get involved. That's it for updates. It's freaking March already. It's crazy. But let's get on with the show. All right, guys. Today's podcast is about a pretty significant problem. Do you guys remember that animated bee movie where the bee finds out that the humans have been stealing the honey and selling it for themselves? It was called the Bee Movie, and it came out in like 2007. So if you haven't seen it, it's not a bad movie. But the reason I bring that up is because it addresses a pretty serious problem which is happening globally, and it happens to be the decline of the bee population. There's several different reasons why the bee population has been in decline over the past recent years, but one of them has been linked to the industrial agriculture that we have. You know, our population continues to grow. There's no sign of it stopping. So in order to feed everybody, we have industrial agriculture filling the supply for all the food demand that we need to survive for the most part. Along with the volume of the industrial crops that we need, comes the need to protect them from pests and animals and scavengers and things like that, which carry bacteria and other insects like ticks and things of that nature. It can ruin a harvest, pretty much. Now, I'm not a farmer, nor do I have any background knowledge of how all that stuff works, but it doesn't take much research to find out and know that the pesticides and chemicals that they spray on our crops, it really isn't the healthiest thing for anybody, really. When we factor in the mass amounts of food being produced, quality somewhat goes out the window, and quantity kind of takes over. So we have to have a lot of food that's in constant supply or constant demand. Needless to say, it's a slippery slope of negative effects on more than just our environment and our bodies. Many of these pesticides that are sprayed often kill bees as well as other pollinators, because bees aren't the only ones. But bees are extremely important for our ecosystem. At the end of that movie that we were talking about, the Bee Movie, the bees kind of go to court. It's really crazy what happens, but basically they get all the honey that the humans have been stealing back, which means they don't have to produce any more pollen or go out and produce any more pollen, because now they could just get fed off all their hard-earned work pollinating and making the honey. And afterwards they show all the flowers and crops and stuff, just everything gets gray. There's no more color. Everything's like dying and stuff because they're not doing any more pollinating. I don't know if that's as much as it would get to, but I think it's a pretty serious deal as far as similarly what would happen if the bee population did stop doing their jobs. Globally, there are more honeybees than any other types of bees and pollinating insects, so they happen to be the world's most important pollinator of food crops as well as flowers or anything else that survives on being pollinated. And according to this website, sustainweb.org or Greenpeace, they talk about the food source, and it's estimated that 1/3 of the food that we eat each day relies on pollination, mainly by bees, but also by other insects, some birds, and bats. A lot of the fruits and vegetables that that are both imported and exported that are grown here or wherever else require pollination, obviously. And some of our favorite, most cherished foods are things like soybeans, especially with all the vegetarians and vegans out there. Everything now is is produced by soy. Asparagus, broccoli, avocado, squash, celery, sunflowers, cucumbers, kiwis, cherries, melons, peaches. The list goes on, and I mean, you get the point. But according to that website, the sustainweb.org, for crops like blueberries and almonds, the honeybees are depended to pollinate around 80% of those crops in just the U.S. alone. And they don't only pollinate the things that we eat, but they're responsible for pollinating clovers and alfalfa, which is like grass and stuff that cattle graze on. So the meat and dairy industry also rely on bees. What else? A bunch of other manufactured products for food and beauty and health products rely on bees. Even our ecosystem relies on these little insects because they also pollinate cotton and flaxseed, different things that are harvested to make clothes. And I mean, you get the point. They're pretty important. They're an extremely essential part of our lives. This story kind of reminds me of the story that Mufasa tells Simba in The Lion King about the circle of life. I know I'm talking about a lot of animated movie references today, but right now we're losing that balance, that circle of life balance, that because of the industry of because of the modern industry where we're constantly polluting the earth as well as affecting the climate. I know I've harped on how devastating climate change is and how big of an impact it's having, not only to animals and nature, but in our daily lives. Now, I know we've identified the problem, and in my quick and limited research, I found some pretty interesting ways that people are coming up with to help solve the problem, come up with solutions. One of them is that other countries have planted kind of little flower gardens over bus stops, you know, those bus shelters that people stand under waiting for the bus. Things like that to help bees find more things to pollinate. It's actually such a huge deal that another country in McDonald's, they've been using the back of their billboards to create small little safe areas for beehives to form, kind of like bee homes to help grow their population as well. But my favorite is how much hemp can help. So while I was doing this research, I found, geez, I can't even speak today. I found that hemp is really helping these pollinators, their population grow. With marijuana becoming more and more legal throughout the U.S., this is gaining a lot more attention. And if you didn't know, hemp is a strain of the cannabis plant that is non-psychoactive. For it to have been outlawed for so long is beyond my understanding. But that's what happens when you have terrible propaganda to demonize a damn plant. But that's a story for another day. And hemp is one of the fastest growing plants. And at one point, one of the first plants to be spun into usable fiber over 10,000 years ago. So it's pretty important. Pretty useful, too. It's got a ton of uses. It can be made into paper, clothing, biodegradable plastic, paint, insulation, biofuel, and it's healthy for animals and us to eat. You know, I know you've heard of hemp seeds and hemp oils, stuff like that. It's actually pretty healthy for you. It's basically a miracle plant that's stronger and lighter than some metals. There's a video out there of a guy who has a bumper made out of hemp, and he's like hitting it with a hammer, and nothing's happening. It's just bouncing right off of it. It's pretty cool. And so back in 2018, Department of Agricultural Farm Bill was passed, legalizing industrial hemp in the U.S. And surprise, surprise, just as when they started to legalize marijuana, in some states, scientists are finding some unexpected benefits from the plant, and one of those benefits is helping the dwindling bee population. To add to this miracle plant, not only is it one of the fastest growing plants, but it's exclusively wind pollinated, which means that the wind carries the pollen, creating an abundance of pollen for a variety of bees and other pollinating insects to survive. Because of all the pesticides used on our food, the access to pollen for bees has been pretty limited. But if they can't get the pollen, they can't eat, and if they can't eat, they can't survive, and well, they die. So since the plant grows pretty high, bees have been found to be able to access the plants and be more attracted to the plants for an abundance of pollen for over 23 different species of bees. I didn't even know there were that many species of bees. But the best of all is that it's not just bees. As I said before, other pollinators can be birds, bats, hummingbirds, and butterflies. And because of the hemp plant, that balance is being restored back to the circle of life thing. And since there are more pollinators, there's more food. And since there's more food, once again, circle of life can be continued to overall help our economy even more because we'll have more pollinators, which means an abundance of more food and cotton and flaxseed and other materials that we use. And especially now, if hemp is being used for all these things, more hemp. So it's a win-win. All of this is simply from legalizing a plant that shouldn't have been illegal to begin with. Also, while I was reading, there was mentions of the actual marijuana plant being just as good of a source of pollen for these pollinators, but not as much, probably because of the pushback on legalizing marijuana. But hemp is good, so that's a check in the box. I could spend another 30 minutes on how there's a ton of beneficial data that shows if we were to stop being so stupid and just legalize a damn plant, the economy, people's ways of life, as well as medical, both physical and psychological health would greatly benefit. Not to mention the amount of people in jail serving nonsense sentences would be able to return to society and help our economy grow by filling jobs and contributing to society, but that's for another episode. The silver lining in this story is that the world is waking up on how important bees are to our ecosystem, and there are measures being made to help save and repopulate the bee population. So if you'd like to be a part of the solution, 4 simple changes you can make in your daily lives to help keep bees and other pollinators, their population strong is 1. You can provide a bee-friendly or a pollinator-friendly habitat in your yard or other outdoor spaces. If you're allergic to the bees, just leave them alone. They'll leave you alone. Keep an EpiPen in case emergencies. But having flowers or plants in a backyard or a green area of some type can absolutely help bees. Eat bee-friendly. Try buying foods that say organic or don't use pesticides. Usually organic means that they haven't used those harmful chemicals. Refrain from using those harmful chemicals around the house as well because it hurts the bees and it's not healthy for you to do so anyway. 3, you can avoid the insecticides on your lawn. If you're a guy who likes to keep his lawn nice and clean and green and short, kind of touching on 2, but not by using those harmful chemicals. And if you need to buy some type of bug repellent, because I know there's a lot of bugs that aren't pollinators, just read the label to see if they can harm the bees. And if not, then just ask someone. I know there's a bunch of different products out there that aren't harmful to bees, but they will kill or keep the other insects away. So it's pretty simple. And the last one is, of course, if you see a bee, don't kill it. Leave them alone. They'll leave you alone. If you don't, as long as you don't have a hive living in your home or under your house or something like that. And if you happen to be one of those people, contact your local beekeeper. Just Google them. Most of the time, they'll safely remove the queen and the hive without harming the bees. And most of the time anyway, we could just let them live. And when those guys take out the queen and the bees and stuff, they give you actually a pretty good jar of honey too. So that's a plus. That's all I really have for you guys today. I hope you learned a little more about bees and the hemp than you did before you listened to the podcast. I definitely learned about a ton of this stuff while I was doing research for the podcast. And maybe this will be something to think about or talk about with families or friends if the topic arises. And I hope you spread the useful information. If you'd like to share a feel-good positive story or contribute to the podcast by sharing some good and useful information or just give us some feedback on the podcast, be sure to give us a message and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Limelight Highlight. We're on Twitter as well at LL Highlight. And if you'd like to send us an email, you can do that at limelighthhighlight@gmail.com. If you'd like to help support the podcast, be sure to give us a 5-star rating if you think it deserves it. And be sure to share if you haven't done so yet. be sure to subscribe and follow the pages. And doing so, you'll get all the updates for new episodes that get released. And